Well, good afternoon. I know we're still assembling. People are moving from one event to the next. I'm Kristen Sullivan. I serve as our Global Sustainability and Climate Services Market Leader, and I'm so thrilled to be moderating this panel today. We're going to talk about some developments with the International Sustainability Standards Board. We're so thrilled to have Marty McBrien. I want to make sure I get your title because she's really the Chief Getting Things Done Officer. Maybe we should change that title, right? But her official title is Chief of Strategic Affairs and Capacity Building at the ISRS Foundation and a member of the UK Financial Reporting Council Advisory Panel. And she's had many, many roles. I will not do it justice, so I will let her introduce herself when we, a little more when we get into the discussions. And then my colleague Noura Tayev, who serves as one of our global sustainability leaders as well. She also leads our audit and assurance services for climate and sustainability in Canada. And Canada, as many of you know or may know, is one of the first jurisdictions to be implementing the ISSB standards. And we'll hear a little bit more sort of on the ground, some of the practical considerations. And so I'm really excited for this conversation. Maybe, Marty, if you can kick us off and first talk about, maybe give a little more context around all the things you do. I wanted to start with some of the headlines that have come out this week. We like our headlines in connection with COP. We've seen tremendous progress in terms of market adoption. And I would be remiss if I didn't start with the acknowledgement that in June, the ISSB, the ISRS Foundation, celebrated the first birthday of the standards. I think I heard it referred to as the twins, the birth of the twins, because the first year of the standards actually being adopted. But importantly, COP is the third birthday of the formation of the International Sustainability Standards Board, and Marty was tremendously instrumental in that. So maybe talk a little bit about the market adoption to date and maybe any other perspectives around these developments.
Thanks so much, and thank you so much for having me here, Deloitte. It's a real pleasure to be partnering with you today. Now, first of all, I think you said introduce myself. I'm a sustainability disclosure, I think, veteran. I've been doing climate one way or another, disclosure now for 15 years as a standard setter. So I think I've got all the scars and the bruises from that, as well as, many successes. And one was this week, our third birthday at the ISRS Foundation's ISSB. And you're making me think we didn't get cake. But anyway, that's one for when we get back. But what we did do on our third birthday, if you like, was we released the TCFD status report equivalent, the new Progress on Climate-Related Disclosure report. Some of you may remember back to that 3-year birthday. We basically said, as we were building the new standards, we'd build off what was in the market. And so we used TCFD as the foundation. And just after we launched the standards last year, TCFD said, well, you brought them in, our job's done. But as part of that, we had to take over the monitoring of the TCFD and the climate-related disclosure reporting. And I'm really pleased to say that, we have seen considerable progress on climate-related disclosure reporting over the last couple of years. It is moving forward. And we looked at quite a big sample of what was out there. We looked at 3,800 companies. At least 80% of those disclose one metric of those 12 already. So we're making good progress. If you think about moving this into annual report and accounts, we have about 42% disclosing 5 to 6 metrics, but we only have 2 to 3% of those 3,800 sampled via the Bloomberg terminal disclosing all of the metrics. So we've got a little way to go in terms of climate disclosure, but we really do hope the progress on moving from voluntary to mandatory via the ISSB standards is going to really help wrap that up over the next couple of years. And so as part of that, I'm really pleased to say as well, it's so busy. I think it's far exceeded anyone's expectations how fast adoption has occurred. And as of this week, we have 30 jurisdictions, or if you want to include every individual EU country, which some people do, over 60 now, looking at progress, really making progress towards considering how to adopt and bring our standards into rules, frameworks, legislation in their jurisdiction. So that's a huge, I can't even believe it myself. I just thought it would not be so quick. And, it was even great yesterday to talk to the Azerbaijan finance ministry about their plans to, start to bring them in. And I was at another event this morning with some of the other stars that are all like, oh, we're bringing this in voluntary and we're on a roadmap and here's our plans from the companies and the banks. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And I'd be remiss if you don't mind me keep talking for just 1 minute.
Please do.
To call out my friends from Turkey in the back. They'll be the first country to have mandatory disclosure of ISSB standards. And the ladies in the room are actually quite instrumental in bringing it in, having been pioneers around integrated reporting as well. So just a little clap for the ladies in the back, because I think they deserve a huge round of applause for all of their hard work. So I'll leave it there.
Fantastic developments. And maybe if you could speak a little bit, Marty, to that really, really important enabling initiative around capacity building. It's so incredibly important. We, Deloitte, are very pleased and really thrilled to be a part of the capacity building network and framework. So if you could talk a little bit about some of the developments on that capacity building side.
Yeah, sure, thanks. And that is another really key part, right? We go out, and I'm sure you both do it too in your day-to-day engagements. We go out to start to talk to people about the standards, and everyone's like, oh goodness, not quite sure. Like, we're not all built to just understand climate as part of our day jobs already. And some people are starting from quite developed. Some people got on the train 15 years ago with me. It wasn't that many, but it was quite an empty train. But that train's getting fuller, and we need to take everyone with us on that train. So, how do we educate the regulators around the world about these standards? And when we go out and work with IOSCO, and we bring the regulators into training programs, we do start with what's scope 1, 2, and 3. What does climate risk look like? What is climate change? What does this mean for markets? And all the way through to, looking at reports and seeing how they really stack up. So we then also work with preparers by many different ways, but one great way we do it is via the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchange Program. So directly with exchanges and issuers. And we bring people together online for 3.5 hours. I know, a long time, right? And homework. And we've managed to get 12,000 people through that program in the last 8-9 months. And we hope to add 50% more to that on top of doubling it next year, because there's so much demand now that we're moving from that voluntary into that mandatory space, and people thinking about, if it's not mandatory, how they can still get ready on a voluntary basis. And we have guidance we released at Climate Week New York, actually, in September, that can help those that just want to do it on a voluntary basis also get started. So we're looking at this from lots of different angles, working with lots of different partners, so in-country partners like in Turkey, global partners like with Deloitte, on how we can make this real for people. Another fabulous challenge, again, if you don't mind, that we're working on at the moment. And this one will resonate, I think, with both of you and your colleagues and your friends. So maybe we can put something in people's Christmas cards or Christmas letters this year across the partnership. But we've been thinking about how do we, a challenge I have is people say, Marty, how are you working with developing and emerging economies? How are you really helping it get to, to everyone around the world and level that playing field? And we've got some things coming next year that will do that. But this year, one of the projects I've been working on is, how do you upskill 125,000 chartered accountants across Africa? Now, don't overthink that, okay? Because that is actually will probably keep you up for weeks at night. I've done it already. I've done it for all of us. But really, if you think about the chartered accountant, and it's quite a tough qualification to get, ladies. You've both done it yourselves. And there will be the people that are either on the boards, they will be the CFOs, they will be the key people in the finance departments, they will be the key people in internal controls, they will be the key people providing assurance to these standards. How are we going to make sure that those in business are currently future fit and ready to take on the challenge for the transition that we're all here talking about now? So working with the Pan-African Federation of Accountants to build a roadmap for how they can then go about bringing the 56 countries that they have in different languages up to speed and get them on that journey of learning really, really quickly so we can build it in. So there is no end to the scope of what we're doing, and we need more, and we need to be tailoring it to individuals' needs, individual jurisdictions' needs, and sometimes right down to individual persons' needs. We all have to take the time to stop sometimes and just answer the really simple, well, not so simple questions.
Yeah, and that's super helpful, and I think it's something that perhaps is a bit under the radar that sort of the mass and the reporting ecosystem don't necessarily appreciate all the investment that's going into building that capacity and acknowledging that this is going to take time, and this is not just taught in undergrad or graduate programs. I'll tell you that for those of you in the audience who are familiar or maybe are not as familiar, even the FSA credential that the IFRS Foundation has is a tremendous resource and certification. We use it in the U.S. for all of our team members, and it's a great, accessible tool in addition to all of the other really intensive.
And there's more coming.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first.
In Q1 next year, all going to plan for me, please cross your fingers, I'll be releasing e-learning freely available to everyone across the world. There'll be 3 or 4 modules, and I'm hoping we can get one tailored just for accountants and one just for sustainability professionals. So to help everyone come together, right? Because we've all got different skills in this game that we need to link up. So I'm hoping that by the end of Q1 we will have a nice, shiny e-learning platform. It comes before the FSA credential. Like, it's the stuff to make you dangerous. It's not the stuff to make you an expert. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But it will be out there for everyone. So we've got that. We also have a knowledge hub, ifrs.org/knowledge hub, and there's 280 resources on there now developed by Deloitte and all our other partners that are, again, free, not behind a paywall. You don't have to put any details in. Your boss won't know you've done it. You can just go and download everything on there, have a look, and again, get started. And if you've got questions, then pop them in there. Tell us. Because then I can ring up Kirsten. I can say, hey, we're missing this. Can you guys build it for us? I can't ask for what I don't know we don't need. So, and that's what we have the great partners for, building on their expertise to help us develop more tools and more resources where it's most needed.
Fantastic. Noura, Canada is one of the countries, in addition to Turkey and the 30 or 60 others, that are taking steps to introduce ISSB standards into the regulatory regime. Can you talk a little bit about what that process looks like, the timeline, and even if you could speak a little bit to the practical, what's the sentiment among corporates and preparers as a part of that?
Sure, yeah. So in Canada, we established a Canadian Sustainability Standards Board, so a local body that effectively, I think of it like a mini ISSB, and they were established to really, we're going to do a swap, to really assess the ISSB standards and ensure that they're fit for purpose for the Canadian market. So what does that mean? It's not about taking away from the standards, but really evaluating whether additional needs or requirements that are unique to the Canadian landscape and the Canadian environment need to be added in, and to really talk about timing of implementation. I think that's one of the key questions that's in the minds of many in this landscape, and especially Canadians. So once the board was established, they were pretty quick. They got some exposure drafts out based on S1 and S2 in March of this year, and they really did not alter the standards at all. So what they proposed in their exposure draft was some phasing in of some of the requirements of the standards, particularly in areas where we know there's going to be challenge, scope 3 GHG emissions, the timing of the actual effective date of the standards themselves, and then the timing of reporting once those standards are effective. So we had a period where everyone was able to comment on the exposure drafts. I think in the end they had over 500 respondents that provided comments on the exposure draft. And a lot of the feedback was really on the timing and whether the timing is appropriate. And I think you can see there is some anxiety about the timing of reporting, particularly, again, timing of scope 3, scenario analysis, resilience testing in the standards requirements, but largely support. And the market believes that these standards are a great baseline. They create that consistency and that comparability, not only within the Canadian market, but on a global stage. So we're supposed to have final standards by the end of the year, end of calendar year, yeah. Here, fingers crossed for us. And then we'll go through a regulatory process in Canada to officially adopt and endorse them.
It's great to hear the practical, and I think further supports just the concrete market momentum that we're seeing. Maybe building on Noura's example, Marty, as you think about the Finance COP, the theme of this COP, yesterday was Finance Day. We heard a lot about the importance of standards, of data, in terms of driving that transparency and confidence to unlock capital. We also are very focused on the role that standards play in helping to enable assurance, and all of that is critical to a reporting ecosystem that can truly drive efficiency. I've heard many members of the ISSB, Chairman Emmanuel Faber, talk about this concept of the passport and how the ISSB standards can really serve as that passport for economies to open up access to capital. Can you speak a little bit to that and sort of how you've seen this resonate, as we know that there's standards that are evolving around the world? We'll talk about interoperability later, but maybe if you could speak to that point.
Absolutely. I think this passport idea that Emmanuel talks about is great, because companies don't stop at their borders, right? Issuers don't stop just there. They're much, much wider than that. And information flows much, much wider than that. So what we're really hoping is that by building that global baseline, we equip people, companies out there, to be able to essentially move wherever they need in the world with that solid foundation of information that can carry them there if they like. A bit like we do with, in my case, my 2 little blue books that I get my stamps in as I move around. It does facilitate that. Now, you may need, in some jurisdictions, for them to do more or, and go above the baseline. But you're equipped to do that because you have that solid foundation or that passport in place to enable you to do that in a cost-effective and a cost-efficient way.
Yeah, and I don't know, Nora, from your perspective, as you think about, clearly Canadian companies are very focused on what's happening with ISSB standards being brought into regulation. They're also, in many cases, I'm sure, preparing for the European requirements. And just kind of that perspective maybe that you're seeing with clients, with companies in Canada, how are they thinking at this point about sort of a global baseline and then understanding how, building on, right? It's the building blocks concept.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be a bit of a demystification, if you will, or demystifying that exact theme, the building blocks, because on the surface you see different standards, different requirements, and it seems overwhelming, and it seems like you're going to just have to do an enormous compliance exercise. But the reality is, both sets of standards, at least from the ESRS, EFRAG perspective, and the ISSB, are really grounded on very similar principles, themes, and if you look at the climate standard, for example, both based on TCFD. So really starting with the same anchoring point. And in fact, there was the interoperability guide that the IFRS Foundation and EFRAG issued that tells you it's almost the roadmap in terms of how the ISSB S2 standard and the ESRS E1 standard, both the climate change standards, work together. And once you read through that, you can really see that, there is a lot of consistency here. And in fact, the areas where there's a bit of a difference, you have that guide to help apply them. So I think it's really about understanding kind of conceptually what these standards are aiming to achieve and really digging through to that next layer to understand they're actually not that different, and where there are differences, there's kind of an ability to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I think that tool that you're referring to was really, really helpful to help companies. Importantly, acknowledge and recognize that the role of standards is to drive rigorous adherence to a set of criteria, and that's the transparency that creates the trust and the confidence. And I think the clarity around the differences as well as the similarities, that you can't just sort of blanket statement, I've followed, you've got to make sure for each individual standard that you are complying with those specific requirements in order to assert that you have applied the standard. So I think there's some nuance there, but really, really important. And clearly, the ISSB has started with a climate-first approach in addition to S1, which is the broader sustainability standard, with plans to continue to explore and expand.
That's right. But I think it's really important just to touch on one point as we go through here. The S1 standard, the general requirement standard, those of you that have the background that you do across accounting would be very familiar with a lot of the terminology in that, because it got taken directly from out the sister board, IASB. But importantly, the S1 standard asks you to report all material sustainability information. And I think sometimes we forget that. It's S2 that deep dives into climate and obviously is effective first, and we've got a relief for S1 in the year one. But the S1, relief for S1, but S1 does require you to think about all material sustainability risks and opportunities that might influence an investor's, whether or not they would allocate capital to you. So I think that's something to really dwell on. Because people say, oh, well, when are we going to get a nature? You kind of have to do it now, guys, if it's material using S1. And we provide guidance on that. We have guidance on nature and on just transition. We have a lot more guidance on some of these key terminologies now on the website, and there'll be more to come. So although we're waiting for the board and they're going through their standard setting process now around in the research phase, and next week they are talking about topics like biodiversity, ecosystem services and nature and human capital at their board meeting. If it's material, you have a lot of what you need to do it now, as well as the sector standards from SASB, which can help you with that, and guidance that CDSB and others produce that's also investor focused that can help you do it now. So there's no excuse to now say, well, there's not a framework for it or none of the stuff. No, there absolutely is one now.
Yeah. Well, and I understand that we should be expecting more guidance on materiality in particular, given that ISSB very much focuses on more investor-focused materiality. Right?
I believe it's imminent. Imminent. I don't want to be quoted as saying it's tomorrow or next week, but there is a board meeting next week. So, good things tend to happen during board meetings. So watch the board meetings for the next few weeks.
Good to know. Good to know. And maybe just to make that a little more practical in terms of the application of S1 and really that sort of awareness for organizations as you're anticipating whether your jurisdiction will be adopting ISSB or some form in the near term. As you think about the evolution of the subject matter domains, the risks, the impacts, the opportunities, and I know we just came off of COP16, so the Nature COP, biodiversity is very much in focus. How do we integrate biodiversity and climate considerations in a much more systematic way? And a lot of questions that we get from clients in terms of the momentum around the TNFD. And so you mentioned that the board has undertaken the research project called the BEES project to focus on biodiversity and ecosystem services. I think one of the best ways that we've been framing it and been engaging with the ISSB around how do you sort of, rationalize as we still have evolving frameworks that are trying to put more specificity, more tools, more context around how do you evaluate biodiversity and nature risk, that S1 can be a really strategic tool applying that sort of investor needs materiality concept to evaluating how do you apply the concepts within TNFD and the insights and perspectives and measurement practices. So there's a very complementary nature, even in the absence of a very discrete standard on biodiversity. So I thought that was a really helpful framing that this isn't sort of, we've got to wait on biodiversity. You've got the tool right now.
Now. You have the tools to do it all now.
Yeah.
And people like you to help.
Which is really important. Any thoughts on that, Nora?
Yeah, I agreed. The tools are there, and I think even within S1, if I'm not mistaken, you can look to other standards and frameworks for some inspiration in terms of how you determine those material risks, opportunities, topics, and how you dispose on them. So I think there's a lot of resources.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And we will open it up for questions. So in the meantime, if you have a question, raise your hand, jump in. Wanted to dig in a little bit more on the concept of interoperability. We touched on it a little bit, and I can tell you, coming from the U.S. market, which is in an interesting position at this time from a regulatory perspective, I think that as we're working with many U.S. global multinationals who are going to be coming under the requirements of the CSRD very, very quickly, and there's a high level of intensity and focus around preparation, there's sort of the lead-in with what do we have to do to be prepared to comply with CSRD and ESRS through a double materiality lens, so that more comprehensive approach. Very quickly, though, we can't be making choices and decisions and conclusions and judgments around materiality of certain matters without thinking through the implications of ISSB, because those requirements are going into effect in Turkey, in Canada, in Singapore, in Brazil. And so, when you think about interoperability in practice, Marty, I don't know, any other insight or perspectives that we might not be able to read just in the interoperability guidance, and just around how the ISSB and EFRAG are working together on an ongoing basis, just because there is such this pent-up appetite for guidance that's practical and implementable.
Thanks very much. I don't think there is much to read about that you haven't seen publicly. We're working very closely with EFRAG. We have a great relationship with EFRAG. We talk to them regularly. We're talking to them about our next work. We're talking to them about their current work plans, around transition plans, and around sector standards. So that conversations are all sort of very live and very much there. And rest assured, we do. There is correspondence between the teams, I'm sure, almost on a daily basis. These aren't just existing in vacuums. But we are talking to standard setters right across the world. We work closely with Canada. We have a regulatory implementation program and guide to support jurisdictions to help with this interoperability piece in Europe, but obviously beyond as we bring the standards in to make sure we are getting that baseline, that passport in place for everyone. So it is a really, we do talk to them a lot, but it's also a really intensive program for us with all of the regulators around the world now just, popping their heads up so we can support as well everyone else that's on the journey to be interoperable and, if not directly aligned word for word with the ISSB standards like we are, looking towards in Canada.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just a really great opportunity to kind of step back. I think what we're finding, in particular from a U.S. context, that there's such this emphasis and focus on what are the requirements and how do I comply. And we really have the opportunity to encourage our clients to step back and think about how standards can be a really important tool to help you focus on what's material to your business. And sort of, it's important to understand what the requirements are, but until you ground yourself in a well-documented, systematic, defensible materiality determination process, there's a lot of inefficiency that you could proceed with. And so I think that emphasis on materiality, the focus on criteria, stakeholders, and how they come in, and thinking through some of this additional guidance that ISSB has provided is really, really important. And working closely with your advisors, with your financial statement auditor, because there's a huge focus that the ISSB has in terms of the connectivity of the non-financial and financial disclosures. So I think that's a really important point. We, Deloitte, published a piece on sustainable business value where we included, just yesterday in connection with Finance Day, where we included a couple of calls to action, if you will, with a real focus on how the ISSB is really taking shape as the global baseline, recognizing that our clients operate across all jurisdictions, and how do we help to really highlight areas where participants in the broad reporting ecosystem can and should be engaging. There were three key themes: prioritizing sustainability matters as business matters. Those of you who are in this room clearly recognize the importance there. Climate risk is business risk. And regardless of where regulation or requirements go, climate risk is not going away. And so really thinking through that lens of what is relevant to my business with the materiality underpinning. Reporting on decision-useful information. ISSB in particular, the EFRAG standards, the ESRS standards, put a lot of emphasis on both the risk of sort of incomplete disclosure, but also on disclosure that could potentially obscure information for users of the information. And so I think it's a really important balance for preparers to really understand. And so we've got some context around that. And then importantly, taking actions to support a coherent global system of reporting on decision-useful sustainability matters. And that's sort of that license and that call to action for all of the participants in the reporting ecosystem to lead with your policymakers, with standard setters, on the opportunity that the standards landscape today presents to drive efficiency and, importantly, help organizations capture the value while also minimizing risk. So any thoughts, Marty, from you, and then Nora on?
First of all, great report and great findings. I think we'd be completely in line with all of those. We are also working outside the ESRS with other standard setters, so really closely with GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. A lot of people already do reporting alongside GRI, so it really is a GRI plus ISSB is your reporting package, if you like, to make sure that we're getting that high quality impact reporting, and working very closely with them now on their biodiversity work to make sure, as we're thinking about our bees work, that we're learning from what they've done and it's as close as possible. We're also working very hard and have published our ISSB digital taxonomy. We have these for our accounting standards, so our digital taxonomies for accounting standards that are in, I think we have digital reporting and financial information in about 95% of GDP across the world. We've now got this for sustainability standards in place, so really trying to make it so if you tag your information and that's all mapped, then actually it becomes much more efficient, because materiality is dynamic and it does move, and it's really important that it's considered as a whole within the business. So working closely with organizations like GRI as well as this year CDP aligned its reporting platform on climate with the S2 questionnaire. So with S2 standard, with their questionnaire. Sorry, too many platform standards frameworks. But I know, I appreciate what you were going through. And I have to talk about it and remember it. But we aligned with them. And so we now know that there are over 20,000 companies out there across the world that have collected data and structured data. It doesn't mean the quality's there, but in line with S2 this year. So again, that means we should start to see, a bit more interoperability there. If you use it, if you collect it there, you can use that same information. It shouldn't require too much more work to think about how you then integrate that into your mainstream reporting practice, because it should already be integrated across your business in the first place if it's making it to the CDP platform.
Any other thoughts from you, Nora?
I think just on your comment about materiality, Kristen, I think it's such a powerful tool to be able to have a framework to apply materiality, and it just allows the organization to really focus not only from a disclosure perspective but also operationally on those topics and areas. So, historically materiality has been defined so many different ways in this space, and having one coherent, consistent definition with some guidance coming soon I think is going to be really helpful globally to have that especially.
And the other really, I think, super thing that they have put in place at the foundation is we have a transition implementation group. And so you can publicly submit your questions onto an online platform on our website. And if you're having some tricky questions when you're applying it, send them in to us. And they can be publicly discussed by people doing this already in business. And we've got some consultants on there too. Really have an honest discussion about what's happening. And then we can, that's published. It can then also support you in how you go about, implementing our standards. So there is a bit out there. I'm not going to say there's a lot out there, but there's quite a lot of different ways to get your questions answered and get started with the standards, either in a voluntary capacity or in a voluntary to becoming mandatory very quickly capacity, or just in a mandatory capacity. There is a lot there, and there are a lot of people you can talk to get help as well.
And I would just emphasize that the transition, the TIG, the Transition Implementation Group, meets regularly, and not only are the questions that they're evaluating available, but their meetings are recorded and available. And they are really, and I happen to be really interested in this, but they are really, really valuable to listen to, because you really hear the context around a real estate company or a beverage company or a retailer. And some of the practical, as we know, there's such an emphasis on industry-specific measurement considerations, but I think it really provides a lot of context and just helpful for the first movers, right? They're kind of paving the way here, and so that transparency is really, really valuable. The other point that I would just raise, because you mentioned it previously, and in this sort of early days of implementation, the guide that was issued in connection with Climate Week, the voluntary adoption guide, is, I think, such a really important resource for preparers as well, regardless of if you sit in Turkey, and this is coming very soon, to a regulator near you, or other parts of the world. I think we generally lead with that standards are incredibly valuable in terms of the explicit criteria that's laid out, rigorous adherence to materiality criteria, which, as we all have said, is the foundation. Standards drive risk protection. You follow the standard, you apply it to your business, you provide the transparency around where judgments were made, and then they enable assurance. And so there's such an important and valuable nature of these standards, even when you don't have regulation, that as the attention, as the market focus on disclosure is going to increase in scrutiny, and that ability to really have the confidence up to your board level that you have applied recognized standards and that you're managing the risk, but also delivering transparency in a way that you're not going to be subject to a greenwashing allegation in any way. And so I think it's just, generally there's this view of standards as compliance, but they're actually a really strategic tool for organizations. And so that's the message we lead with quite a bit. Any final thoughts from you all? And again, we'll open it up for questions here, but any final observations?
guess I'd just say, from sitting in my seat is regardless of where you are and where you need to be, pick them up and get started, because starting early just lowers the cost of getting started. It lowers the cost of any form of compliance might come down the way, and it opens you up to so many more opportunities. This is really about resilient businesses and supporting. We're sitting here at COP. Every COP, I think, is a finance COP, isn't it? Don't we say nowadays? We have Finance Day, and every COP's about the finance, but every COP needs to be a finance COP at the moment. And when we're talking about mobilizing money, we really do need that transparency there to support and drive that, and that's what disclosure brings. So there's no downsides to getting started early and picking up the voluntary guide. Look at the proportionality and the scalability mechanisms that were built into the standard, or built into the standards to help you get started. And we've said it, we say it a lot, it is a journey. You won't be perfect year one, but explain your story and you'll understand it, and the auditor will get right past it. They'll understand, It's about telling your story, getting started, and talking about what you don't know, right? Yeah. There's lots we don't know too. And don't be afraid, but without a doubt, pick them up, have a read, and get started.
Nora.
I think echo that sentiment. The sooner we all get started, the better. And I think, while it is a new set of standards and that can be daunting at times, there's a lot that's been taken from the financial reporting side of the IFRS Foundation into the ISSB standards. There's a lot of language that's been borrowed from IFRS and brought into ISSB. So there's a lot we already know how to apply in the context of financial reporting. And even the standard setting itself and the standards itself, we do this in financial reporting all the time. We have new standards, we have to implement them. So it's no different. And I think, we should embrace this challenge. And as Marty said...
Maybe go speed dating with your colleagues, right? Go and find the people in your business. So if you are in the finance department, go and find those people working on sustainability that have been doing this, or whoever's been doing it. Because, I think it's a lot to learn, right? Yeah. I think we find that sometimes people go, IFRS, this fits in finance. And yes, I do believe it does fit within finance.
Sure.
But a lot of this information is being collected and structured and done in other parts of the business for years. So speed date across your business, go and meet everybody. See how you can bring this together, because sustainability is a full organization sport, right? It doesn't really fit anywhere anymore. It has to be part of the blood and the day-to-day. Yes. So, sorry, I've been doing to cut in, but it's just like a good time.
No, it's a great point.
Go and meet everyone that's doing this in your business. Bring everyone together. I was somewhere, sorry, I'm keep going on, but I was somewhere this morning and everyone was saying, legal's the barrier. Legal feels to be our real barrier at the moment. How are we going to, get legal comfortable with some of this? So it's, not scared to actually be really disclosing the right information. We need to date our legal team in a way, don't we? And start to bring them on a journey.
Sustainability is a team sport, for sure. Questions from anyone here?
Let's go look at the Turkish here.
This is more comment. I'm from Turkey. I am chairwoman of Integrated Reporting Association in Turkey. And this is leading institutions to implement IFRS S1 and S2, because this is corporate reporting association. We are working together very closely, and in Turkey, S1 and S2 is a mandatory next year. Just except scope 3 for a while, not too long, but also mandatory to limited assurance, which is challenging. So I would like this our responsibility to lead the company to prepare this process, which is not really easy. We have three main problems. First is interoperability, because very close country to Europe, we have to respect ESRS. We have to implement this standard as well. We are using GRI as well. And also we have integrated reporting framework, put all together all this information. We are trying to practice the company to how to use integrated reporting framework to pack, but pack meaning not negative meaning, to put all this information together with concise way. We are using technology. I can share later, which is very important for us. But the first is interoperability, which is not really easy. Second one is connectivity. This is the biggest question from the company. They need really help from the consulting companies, because not really easy to explain them connectivity between financial and non-financial. So this is one of the biggest problem, it was the problem for integrated reporting as well. But if the company prepare integrated report, they already have a practice. They really ready to implement S1 and S2 because they know connectivity. But the rest of them, huge problem. And third one is the assurance. You know, assurance is like means serious something, not like reporting something. You have to get assurance from you. So we are just trying kind of, turning point in Turkey, just try to get benefit from this, change in the reporting environment. But in Turkey, our aim is that redesign our reporting environment, reporting ecosystem. We just try to get benefit to increase the competition level of the companies. We try to get better investment climate, which is the real target for us. That's why all regulatory bodies, ministers, everybody aligned in this process. We had a huge meeting last week, just before coming to COP29. We invited 2 Deputy Minister of Finance. They were at our meeting. We invited Chairman of Capital Market Board. They are all our, we invited, of course, our joint organization between Borsa Istanbul Stock Exchange, and Public Oversight Authority. So what I'm telling, this combination, they have to work together. This is not like problem for business. This is, collaborative effort, shared responsibility from all these organizations. I always recommend to work together. So as an Integrated Boarding Association, we are aiming to lead this coordination between this organization. I think they already confessed they really need this leading process as well. So that's the comment and some explanation about our country.
Well, thank you for that, and of course, thank you for your leadership. I think just your point about the 3 key challenges. One of the themes I think that was very well articulated during a Climate Week session that we had with ISSB was just this recognition in the market, and it speaks to everything we've covered here, that it took us like 60 years to get to a place in financial reporting where we had control environments that were subject to independent assurance, the integrated audit, in the terminology of Sarbanes-Oxley, the internal controls over financial reporting. It took us 60 years to get to a place where we have an integrated audit of the financial statements. For sustainability, we are trying to accelerate the rigor of application of authoritative standards, putting the control environment and governance structure around that information that you could argue is more complex in many cases, requires a lot more judgment. The policies, procedures, methodologies are still evolving, and subjecting that entire disclosure to independent assurance. And we're trying to achieve that in 3 years. And when you really understand how much of a real evolution in the market, many might call it a revolution, right? It's pretty compelling, and so I think it speaks to the opportunity that comes with this more rigorous, disciplined, and valuable information in the market.
One more sentence. I think we have to train and teach the company how they can get benefit from this process. This is the carrot. It's a huge carrot, but they don't really aware of at the moment because something difficult for them. Not really easy to provide all this information on time. So I think we have to teach the company how they get benefit from this process. This standard will provide maybe cost reduction, not only risk reduction, and they have to process all these things with a lower risk and also lower cost. But we need to just explain it. And also financial institutions, I think one of the biggest transformer in this process, if they demand this kind of information more and more from the companies, they are getting ready much more than regulatory influence, I think. That's, I think, a huge leverage for us.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you again. Any other final questions?
Thank you, all of you, for this interesting conversation. One quick one. Kristen, to your point, you mentioned we're trying to achieve so much in such a short time frame, right? And it involves so much judgment from management. I wonder where in your experience do those charged with governance, where do they stand on this? Do they prioritize appropriately? Do they understand the urgency? Because as an audit partner, when I speak to audit committees, I see a large spectrum of stances on this. Some companies say, well, help us understand the minimum requirements we need to comply with. We're not too worried about that. But some audit committees say we're really worried about this change that's coming up, and for us, getting numbers wrong in non-financial reporting is as bad, maybe even worse, than getting the financial numbers wrong, reputationally from stakeholders. So, in your experience, where do those charged with governance over entities are in that spectrum? Do they prioritize appropriately, or?
It's a really, really important point. I think we do see quite a spectrum in terms of where boards are in upskilling, in board education, in thinking about the skills and competence that's required to be able to deliver on this overall remit. And I think it comes back to anchoring on sustainability risks are business risks. And it's not sort of a set of bolt-on obligations. It needs to be viewed through the lens of enterprise risk management, allocation of resources, and how you make decisions and trade-offs around risks as they emerge, and a deeper understanding through more access to data to help really prioritize. And I do think that very simply, the compliance objective is the driver at this point, very clearly, because boards have that overall oversight responsibility. But I do think that, at least in the boards that I engage with, it's very much almost sort of there's a table stakes set of investments and expectations that we're just going to have to deliver on, no different than new cybersecurity requirements or new technology, AI oversight. There's also a very quick pivot to, as a fiduciary, as overseeing risk and strategy, we're leaving a lot of value on the table if we're not taking the opportunity to understand where this is going to go and how we can look to the strategic advantage. And so I think it's still a maturity, right? This is going to take time, back to the point of that compression. But it is one that we have an obligation as auditors to be bringing this message to our clients. That's what the boards of our clients expect. I don't know, Nora, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think, varying degrees. And I think some of it is education, too, for those charged with governance. And, this is an area that they're not perhaps traditionally informed of or educated or trained on. So I think also advancing the education of the boards to understand really the concepts and the subject matter will help elevate it on the agenda. And again, materiality, grounding the conversation on materiality, I think really helps get that right level of governance over these topics.
Materiality, cost of capital, long-term business resilience, they're all really important words, I think, to think about when we get it to the top table.
Absolutely.
Great. One more question? Great.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all for highlighting your efforts towards this sustainability reporting. I would like to ask Marty regarding since S1 and S2 standards are voluntary, so is there any roadmap to take those standards towards assurance side? Because there are developing countries which, until and unless you don't put pressure on them or don't emphasize the importance of these standards, so they would be reluctant to implement these standards. So I would like to ask this question.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, and it's a really good question. So when the ISSB publish their standards, they don't require assurance. it's up to the market, the jurisdiction where they bring them in, to decide what level of assurance and when could be required around the standards. So the board write the standards in such a way they stack up or could be used for assurance provisions, but then it's not something we say you have to do. So it's down to the individual company then, on a voluntary basis, to consider how they'd like to proceed with that information when they publish it. And then obviously the regulator as it moves from voluntary to mandatory. But being prepared earlier from a voluntary basis does allow that cost of assurance, or dare I say it in a Deloitte pavilion, to maybe be a bit cheaper. So there is some value in in getting started and thinking about what you might need, even if you're not quite publishing it yet. Getting organised as well behind the scenes, thinking about the disclosures that are required and what it might take for you to get there when the regulator does come and may say limited or reasonable assurance.
Yeah, and I might add this concept of assurance readiness that is really, really important in the market, especially at a voluntary moving towards regulated. If you think about, again, back to the analogy to financial reporting, when you're sort of on the back foot, you're not as efficient. And the assurance lens to preparation can help you prioritize, help you understand what's table stakes, what do I really need to invest in now, how do I make sure I do this right the first time, and I'm not going to have to go back and retrofit. That all speaks to efficiency, value, cost effectiveness, and risk protection. And so I think really thinking about this, importantly, assurance readiness, assurance, rather than thinking about, this is another burden from a cost and effort perspective. Actually, it's a strategic tool to really prepare you that you're leading, from a position of strength, as well as well-positioned to comply. And that, back to Marty's point, is where you can actually realize that value attribution from the market, because you've done the steps in the right manner. So. Okay, well, thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Marty and Noura. This is a fantastic conversation, and thank you all again. Have a good rest of your day.